IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to one more episode of All Things Policy. In today's episode, we'll talk about India's constitution. To be specific, we'll talk about the intentions, motivations, strategies of those who drafted India's constitution. The conversation will be around Madhav Khosla's book, India's Founding Movement, the Constitution of a Most Surprising Democracy. To discuss this, I have with me my colleague Apurv. Apurv is a senior program manager with Takshila. He manages Takshila's flagship postgraduate program in public policy. Hi Apurv, welcome once again to All Things Policy.
Hey, thanks, Sarthak. Thanks for having me again.
So Apurv, you have been reading India's founding movement. In this book, the author talks about how and why democracy came to be chosen for India. And again, when we use the term democracy, it can mean a lot of things. If we have two democratic states, their institutions, designs, structures can vary. So Madhav Khosla focuses on different areas and analyzes the same. Right? He focuses on why we have codification of democratic principles, why India has an overarching centralized state, and again, how does the Indian Constitution, address the issue of representation. So Apurv, I wanted to know why is it important to study all these dimensions.
Thanks, Sarthak. It is extremely important to understand the very sort of dilemmas that the constitution makers were having in the initial years post-independent, because I think it is these dilemmas that give us the reason to understand and realize how difficult it was to sustain democracy in a country like India, where it was not destined that the democracy will sustain, right? And all of us know that several obituaries were written on Indian democracy. So people said that India will break into several smaller countries like the Balkans, and there will be anarchy, and the law and order won't prevail. But here we are, more than 70 plus years of Indian democracy, 17 general elections, and we are a sort of a robust democracy. So keeping this idea in mind, I think it's very important to read such text, because it gives us a lot of answers to the questions that have not been addressed. And in the initial chapters, Madhav has sort of given us a context as to why this is important to read such a text and to understand what was going on within the Constituent Assembly debates, because the themes that he have spoken have been consistent in all the Constituent Assembly debates deliberation. So two reasons which Khosla gives to read, to understand and to delve into India's founding movement were these. First, that not much has been written on India's founding movement, especially when the constitution was drafted and India became republic. So he contrasts this with the 18th century American Revolution and French Revolution, which is actually regarded as a watershed moment in the democratic history of humankind. And you would remember that Federalist Papers were written, I think, around 15 or 20 years after American Revolution. So a lot has been written on about French Revolution and American Revolution and what happened to those societies post that. But not much has been written on the India's founding moment. And founding moment is being defined as those crucial years when our constitution was drafted. And some of those frameworks which we will talk about were sort of inserted into the constitution so as to so that India becomes a democracy, and the constitution morality, as Ambedkar would say, would sort of percolate into the society, because we had a society. Broadly, we still have that society where such constitutional norms won't easily sort of seep in. So that's a reason number one. The second reason which Khosla argues that we should be reading about India's founding movement is that democracy in India came at the stroke of the midnight hour, and adult franchise was given to millions of Indians. And this is quite important to understand, because whenever the adult franchise was given to the population, it was given at a certain level of education, wealth, and prosperity. In India, it came at a very early stage, and so this was what the big challenge of the constitution makers was, that here we are in a country where we don't have such conditions. So what are we going to give to the country, and what are we going to write in that constitution, so that we can compensate these I would say preconditions. So it is these two themes that run throughout the book, Sarthak.
So, Abu, this is an interesting point. Generally, in most of the other democracies, right, the way we have had the constitution, it is more of a gradual thing, right, evolutionary thing. So, over a period of time, people were demanding for different rights, and all these rights and all these things are getting codified within the constitution. But in case of India, the society was at a different level altogether, while the constitution is at a different level, right? The society might not have been egalitarian, but the constitution will have provisions related to equality. And the constitution is basically trying to change society. So it's trying to bring about, or it aims to bring about, some form of a social revolution uh, in the Indian society.
That's right. I think that's the key word, Sarthak. And the social revolution is what Granville Austin also talks in his book Indian Democracy, Indian Constitution, the cornerstone of a democracy. So social revolution is what the idea was, and we should sort of, whenever we are reading these texts, Sarthak, I think it's a great idea to keep the Constituent Assembly debates open on a different sort of tab, or something else, so that we also know and understand that these were fiercely debated issues and topics. So the Constituent Assembly was as chaotic 70 plus years ago as it is chaotic right now. That's important. And the social revolution was the idea. The society was not ready. The society didn't have those preconditions, but the constitution tried to give those conditions.
Apur, since we are talking about social revolution, how the Indian state through constitution is attempting to change the society, I think I should point this out to our listeners that this is something that we teach at Takshashila in our graduate certificate program in public policy. And not just social revolution, we also have modules related to paradoxes, limitations that the Indian state faces. And at present, the admissions for our 12-week graduate certificate program in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology policy, and health and life sciences are open. Application deadline for our upcoming cohort is 28th August. You can visit our website for more details, takshila.org.in/courses. Coming back to the discussion, since you mentioned that the Constituent Assembly was chaotic, I'm wondering how chaotic the Indian society would have been back then. And there would have been a need to reduce the chaos, or at least to bring the society to the same level when it comes to understanding. So, and one of the way it would have been done is through codification of the democratic principles. And Madhav also talks about that the Constitution of India aims to codify different democratic principles. And again, this is reflected in the fact that our constitution is a bulky document, right? India's constitution is one of the longest constitution. In fact, it's the longest constitution in the world. Initially it had some 395 articles divided into 22 parts, 8 schedules, and at present some 448 articles and 12 schedules are there, right? So he talks about codification, and one of the reason for codification is maybe bringing everyone in the society to the same level. So what is the other, is there any other interpretation here?
I think you are right, Sarth. I think that was the idea, to codify everything in the constitution. And when the drafting committee and those deliberations were going on, there were debates that there were people who said that, I think, in fact, the constitution makers were trying to strike a balance between not codifying too much and codifying very little. So they have to strike a balance so that they don't become sort of so the constitution doesn't become an administrative, right? So that was the idea. Khosla says that the codification was done in order to provide a pedagogical tool to the Indian citizens. And this pedagogical tool was is used to give the rules of grammar to the people who didn't even know the language of democracy and constitution. So the codification becomes important because you codify everything in this document, and this will become a precedent for the coming generations to follow. He has used several case studies, Sarthak, and I would just pick up one case study. So, one such case study is the directive principles, Sarthak. So, Ambedkar wanted to include directive principles into the constitution. He and his colleagues at Constituent Assembly knew that the state at that point, and in fact, in decades following that moment, is not capable to fulfill the needs of the citizens, such as health, nutrition, education, and employment. The state was not capable, and that's why directive principles, you cannot enforce directive principles, and you cannot challenge if your directive principles have not been met to the court, to any court, right? So he wanted to include this into constitution so that it becomes a precedent for the parties that will form the majority, or the parties that would become part of the legislature, so that it becomes a precedent for them to fulfill that constitutional aspirations. Aspirations is the key word here. Whenever after 5 years the political actors would go to the citizens to ask for their votes, it is this directive principles and the aspirations that these directive principles articulate that should be the sort of, that should be in their mind whenever they are going into the people who ask for their votes. So that becomes important, and broadly codification was important because if you codify this into a constitution, what you are doing is that in a society which has fault lines like India, you are giving a common language to every citizen and asking them to talk in that common language.
Yes, Apoor. So this is interesting because you mentioned one thing that codification can mean two things, and here we are trying to balance. One is you are using codification to control your people, your citizens. This was typically the case when the colonial powers were there. They came up with different kind of codes, IPC, CRPC, all these things they came up with. But the purpose at that point of time for codifying all these things was to control the people. But now what we are trying to do, we are trying to create one shared understanding, right? So the constitution, the frameworks of the constitution, they want to create a social welfare state. But for that, we need to have some common understanding, some shared understanding of the socio-economic goals. And all these things are part of the constitution, and especially the socio-economic goals are part of the directive principles for state policy. And the aim here is to ensure that the democratic institutions that are being set up, they will be guided by these socio-economic principles which are part of the directive principles. And these principles are not justiciable. The electorate, the citizens, they cannot take the government to the courts in case these are violated. But when there is elections, the electorate can hold the government accountable, right? So if the socio-economic principles are not being followed, then again, they might not vote for the candidate who is not following it.
That's right, Sarthak, and I'm glad that you brought up IPC and CRPC, because IPC, CRPC, these are older sort of laws, right? And Government of India Act, the 1919 Act, the idea of these acts were to sort of control people, because it's a colonial setup and you had a foreign rule, so you need to control the quote unquote natives using these laws. It was a constitution that gave rights and talked about protecting those rights and about the socio-economic aspects that you talked about, sir.
Yeah. So, and here when he talks about codification, apart from the directive principle, he also talks about the reason why we have different kind of limitations on fundamental rights, right? So as per our constitution, different fundamental rights are not absolute, right? So he talks about why there are different kind of limitations imposed on fundamental rights. And if there are limitations on fundamental rights, we would assume that it is restricting our freedom. But he says that no, these limitations are there so as to enable more freedom rather than restrict freedom.
That's right, Sarthak, and it's a brilliant sort of an argument that happened in CAT deliberation. So when there were few members who argued and who were sort of miffed by the fact that for every right or for everything you have a clause and a subclause, which means that either there's a lot of confusion that's happening and you are actually restricting the rights by adding those clauses, to which the constitution makers and Ambedkar and others said that no, they are actually trying to articulate it in a more sort of a easy manner so that people would understand. This is very different from the US constitutional setup, Sarthak, because in US the Supreme Court actually may sort of may enter into this terrain and may interpret clauses and subclauses. That is what our constitution makers never wanted to happen, because it would make things more vague and more open-ended and more discretionary. So they said that that it would be good idea if they can add those clauses and subclauses within the constitution document.
So basically, what they have done is they have mentioned what are the rights, but at the same time, they have also mentioned those specific grounds on which the rights can be limited, on which the rights can be curtailed. And they are doing this so that the rights cannot be violated on any other ground. And as you mentioned, the US Constitution gives sufficient space for the judiciary to interpret it, and in case of India also, judiciary is the final interpreter of the constitution. But Madhav says that judiciary back that at that point of time, you are also creating the institution of the judiciary, and or at least and the judiciary would have been a very nascent institution back
That's
then,
right. That's right.
and it would not have cultivated the constitutional morality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but one issue that I see with limitations of fundamental rights is, look at the scenario right now, right? So there are people arrested because they were on the grounds that they were a threat to public order, they were a threat to national security.
I think, Sathak, it's what's happening in the current scenario is that people are misinterpreting what is there in the constitution, what is there in those clauses and subclauses, and they are using those things to suit their purpose. I don't believe, and I don't think so anyone else would believe that the when they were putting those clauses, the idea was to curb rights and freedom and civil liberties. The idea would have been to enhance these liberties, not to curb these liberties. Now, as the political environment and ecosystem changes and has changed, political parties have used and misused those elements, key elements, to suit their purpose. But we shouldn't. That's what misinterpreting means. They have misinterpreted what's there in part 3 of a constitution.
Yeah. So apart from this, one more thing that Madhav Khosla talks about is how the framers of the constitution, they wanted to create. In fact, they have created India as a federal polity. But what we observe over a period of time is our polity has strong centralizing tendencies. And I mean, there are different provisions in the constitution which point to the same. The union government is stronger. It has, the number of subjects on which it can make laws. The concurrent list is under it. The different institutions that we have a integrated independent judiciary, and the states might not have sufficient role over there. The all India services, again, the union government appoints, recruits, trains them. So there are many features in our constitution which point to the fact that we have a strong centralized overarching state. What could be the rationale why the framers of our constitution went ahead with this?
At the heart of this debate, Sarthak, are the fundamental sort of debate that political philosophers and scholars have been trying to resolve over the past several years, and the dilemma is between strong state, weak society, vis-a-vis weak state and strong society. At that point, there were fierce debates between two camps. In camp number one, we had Gandhi and an economist named Radha Kamal Mukherjee. And not many people would know about Radha Kamal Mukherjee. He actually wrote a book in 1923 which actually says which concurs to what Gandhi said in Hind Swaraj, that India should be not divided, but it's the Indian villages who should become the epicenter of all the governance and administration, and they should have their own ecosystems of administering themselves and run their own economies, and so on and so forth. So this was camp number one. On camp number two, we had Nehru and Ambedkar, and they too also had distinct views. So they said that this village republic and decentralization is not a feasible idea in India at that moment, because we had just sort of witnessed partition, and there were several fissiparous sort of elements that would sort of break India into smaller lands. So this is not a feasible idea. But Nehru said that apart from this, you need a strong centralized state that can bring in industrialization and modernity. And he was impressed by the Soviet, of course. I mean, yeah, at that point, he was impressed by Soviet model, but we knew that what happened to that model later on. But that's a separate sort of topic of debate. But
Debate, yeah.
yeah, so he was impressed with the Soviet model, that you have a strong centralized state which has its own political authority, and it is this political authority that can drive the modernization and industrialization. That was Nehru. Ambedkar's argument was very different, and I think it's quite interesting. He said that the Indian societies have so many fault lines, and especially he was talking about caste, that Indian society we can't depend Indian society to reform itself and to bring in democracy in India. So that's where he argued that it should be a strong state driven by constitutional morality that can bring in those reforms and can bring in the notions of citizenship, rather than divided into several caste groups, ethnicity, so on and so forth. So this was a fundamental debate that happened. We know which camp prevailed later on, Sata.
Yeah. And this is interesting because Gandhiji wanted to have village republics. The villages should be independent. While Dr. Ambedkar, he had a different viewpoint about villages. He used to say that villages, what is a village? I mean, this is his quote. What is a village? But a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism. Right? So Ambedkar wanted to change this thing, and village republics would not have been the solution for it, right? How do you basically reduce all these social evils, social practices, especially the caste-related prejudices that existed back then? So, I mean, that's the primary reason why we are having a centralized, overarching state rather than localized regional autonomous units.
That's right, Prasad. I mean, think of this as an example that if someone has fever and you have two doctors, one is Mohandas Gandhi and the second is Ambedkar. So Ambedkar would give you a medicine, and he will say that you should pop up this pill and your fever would go away. Gandhi won't give you the medicine and won't give you the pill, and he will say that it's your body that will fight this particular sort of flu, and you will be okay in a few days. So this was a dilemma. This was a debate that was happening, and we knew whether the pill worked or the other thing worked. We all knew what happened after that.
Yeah. So apart from this debate related to centralization, another thing is the issue of representation, right? How do we address the issue of representation and how we have gone ahead with it?
That's right, and it's quite a complex sort of I would say issue which our constitution makers were trying to address, because partition had just happened. At the time, they started. Yeah, of course, they started in 1946, and it went on till 1949. But while they were having these Constituent Assembly debates, partition happened. Millions of people were displaced. Millions of people were killed. And so representation became extremely important. And what they did in Indian Constitution was that they removed the identity-based representation with individual identity-based representation. So, which means that the citizens won't be any sort of electoral kind of quotas or electoral sort of reservations for a particular community. In fact, every citizen will have a right to vote to any representative with no matter which sort of community he or she belongs to. So it actually gives the power of voting to an individual rather than community, and that was, I think, the idea which Ambedkar and other constitutional makers were trying to address, because as long as you will keep on voting on the lines of identity, the horrors of partition would keep on happening. And from 1919 to 1947, they have used several sort of frameworks, Minto-Morley reforms, and several other kind of rules on the that sort of gave the power to vote on the basis of your identities, but that didn't work. And 1947 was a result and was an outcome of those experiments. So those experiments actually failed. That's why the constitution makers thought that it's high time that we should do away with all these identity based representation, and we should have an individualized kind of a representation.
Yeah, so I mean, the experience of partition would have played a major role in the decision that we went ahead with. But also another thing, if you look at India and the diversity that is there in India, right? So if something like communal representation continues to exist, and given the kind of diversity we have in terms of languages, in terms of religion, caste, etc., so this would have become even more problematic in future. It could have sharpened communal differences, and it could have also hindered development in the long run.
That's right, Sarthak. And I think they were, at that time, they were sort of thinking about religious identity, but you are right. I mean, what would have happened if these communal representation were on linguistic lines? So I think we would have faced serious repercussions of that.
Yeah, and another way also they are looking at Indians, right? They're basically looking at Indians. They're subjecting Indians to an institutional state force which treats Indians as equal agents. But when you are having something like communal representation, which used to be there in the past, separate electorates, it restricts the choice of individuals. But with the constitution, this entire thing we are taking care of, right? We are recognizing each individual as a separate unit, and we are recognizing the agency of each individual.
That's right, Sarthak. So I think consider this as, consider this example. For example, you are part of a particular kinship, or you're part of a particular village, and you are voting your representative on the basis of communal representation. So your village would sort of vote to a particular person on the basis of some identity kind of a dimension, and so would the other 30, 40, 100 villages around you, right? So you have different authorities, you'll have different kinds of rules, you'll have different kinds of administrative setup. And a country as vast as India, where you have lakhs of Indian villages and these smaller sort of territory states and other geographical setup, this would have become extremely difficult to govern. But what these two frameworks, Sarthak, centralization, strong centralized state, and representation, they did was to lift you above your kinship, above your narrow allegiances to your community, to your sort of identity based affiliations, and make you as an Indian citizen. And so you are as empowered Indian citizen as other sort of villages or other co-villagers, and all of you are kind of a same sort of a citizen under a large umbrella called Indian democracy or Indian constitution. So this was a visualization, or this was a kind of a vision that the constitution had.
Yeah. So basically, the framers of our constitution, they are rejecting communal representation. But here there is also a twist, because they reject communal representation, but they are allowing for caste-based reservations.
That's right, Sarthak. And Khosla sort of argues that it was actually Ambedkar's argument that why we should have a caste-based reservation, because here we have a disadvantaged community who have seen marginalization for thousands of years, and they need a voice. And It's the constitution, and it's the moral duty of the constitution to give them voice. And that's why they sustained caste-based sort of representation and quotas and so on and so forth, but they did away with religion-based. And again, the partition would have loomed large in the backdrop when they were making this decision.
Yeah. So basically, see, the caste institution is an institution which has been there for like ages, and because of caste system, what happens? Occupation is decided on the basis of birth. So it is a mechanism by which division of labor as well as division of laborers is happening, and as a result of which, what has happened is among some communities there is concentration of social capital, political capital. So they are at a disadvantage. They're at an advantage, and other communities are at disadvantage. So some groups, some communities tend to dominate. Now, Dr. Ambedkar is of the view that we need to diminish the power of certain communities. I mean, they have been continuously dominating, and because of the capital they have. And as we have been talking about, the constitution is all about individualization of identity, right? So through caste-based reservation, they are trying to change the power hierarchies that have existed in the society for a long period of time.
That's right, Sarthak. And I think this is what annihilation of caste was, the idea of annihilation of caste, because through constitution, Dr. Ambedkar wanted to annihilate the caste.
Yeah, and this is also the place where I think Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhiji, they are also differing, because Gandhiji thought that it will be the society which can be the driver of change. The changes have to come from within. The society has to reform. While Dr. Ambedkar is of the view that the state has to be the driver of change. And again, how will the state be the driver of the change? It is through constitutional mechanisms, right? So the constitution has provisions for affirmative action and caste-based reservations.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. All right. So my concluding sort of remarks would be this, Sarthak, that I think it's extremely important to read Madhav Khosla's book, and our listeners should sort of definitely read this book to understand what happened, what were the dilemmas that the constitution makers were facing in those formidable years of Indian democracy. That's one. It is also extremely important to read such text. And when I'm saying such text, it could be a combination of books, and we can discuss this in a sort of later episode, Sarthak. So this and Ornit Shani's book, How India Became Democratic. So while Madhav Khosla's talk about the constitutional foundation, Ornit Shani's book talk about the institutional foundation, because that book talks about how the first General Assembly elections were held between 1951 and 1952. So it's extremely important to read such text, because it gives us an idea and understanding as to how democracy was sustained in our country. And this is what we started talking with, that how democracy sustained in a country where it was not destined to sustain. And we know that there are preconditions, and how these frameworks, these ideas try to set up those preconditions at the stroke of the midnight hour is what we should sort of learn, and we should sort of appreciate while reading these texts. It is also extremely important for emerging democracies around the world who are facing civil wars and other sort of struggles to learn from the Indian constitution making process, and how they can use some of these frameworks and try and bring in that democratic change in their countries. And I think some of these frameworks would be useful for these countries to help them set up their constitutions and try and bring in that constitutional morality that the Indian Constitution and Dr. Ambedkar spoke about.
Thanks, Apurv, for summarizing this. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. We'll meet again in one more episode of All Things Policy. Thanks again.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, CET, Cred, and Global Victoria. We thank you so much for making all of this possible. So this week on Cyrus Says, Tapsi Pannu was recently featured in the Netflix original Haseen Dilruba was on. They discussed her experiences in Bollywood and a whole lot more. On Begin the Journey, Ashish Vidyarthi enlightens us with his wisdom on how one can get freedom from their own thoughts or insecurities when they communicate with others. On The Millennial Athlete, Tanvi and Shlok fill us in on all the drama from the world of sports with Wimbledon, Euros, and World Test cricket making headlines every day. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav Mamoria kicks off a new series, Beneath the Veneer. We travel to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, where he takes us through his first experience of encountering the Red Sea. We have a brand new show, Misconduct. It's a true crime show hosted by Ragvi, a lawyer, and Nisha, a PR pro. They tell us about the story of Cyanide Malika, the lady who offered cyanide-laden sweets to women and after they died, loot their gold. On the Global Victoria Tech Talks podcast, we showcase some compelling new tech stories coming out of Melbourne. On one episode, Pawan Srinath speaks to Joe Agan from Nelnet International, where they discuss how the pandemic has affected the edtech sector and its evolution. Another episode has Varun Digirala talking to Ross Simons from Big Ant Studios about the gaming ecosystem and how they envision translating a sport to a game. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Do you know Tamil? Tamil Puriyuma? Do your children enjoy great stories that inculcate good values? Hi, I am Ravishankar Balachandran and I host the Storytime Tamil podcast. I am excited to share a short story with great moral values every day. Listen to Storytime Tamil on the IVM podcast app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts from.